That makes it easy.
Take our
I
turns?
can help.
Can you?
I can help.
Okay.
All right, here we go. We're going to call this meeting to order. Roll call shows that we are down 2 council people, but that will, hopefully we will have them back next week, or we'll pick one now. Now it's time for the open forum. Anybody who has anything to say? You guys are both on the agenda. Does anybody want open forum? Okay. Close the open forum, move on to the consent agenda. Is there any changes that we would like to make to the consent agenda as presented?
I would like to add the discussion about the Tobacco 21 ordinance the county board passed, and conversation about what the city might be interested in doing.
Okay, add that to the bottom of the agenda. And does anyone have would they like to pull any parts of the consent agenda for discussion? We have the typical 3 items. We have the MnDot boost grant letter of support. So that is basically just having the city act as fiscal agent for a grant to have to expand the adaptive bicycle and bicycle education fleet that that Safe Routes to School already has.
I don't know if we have to be the fiscal agent. I think she just wants us to write.
She just wants us to let her support.
Yeah, the letter of support,
Okay.
because the question, I think, about the fiscal agent was still up in the air. The clinic
Okay.
might take on that responsibility.
All right, and then we also have a new firefighter to hire. So unless somebody would like to pull an item for discussion, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda with the amendment to the agenda.
I will make that motion.
Okay,
Second.
motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Okay, so now is time for the 2020 budget levy hearing. And I don't know if you guys have anything you want to say about that. Just for the sake of conversation, we can go through the information on the 2020 budget, just so that it's recorded. Do you want to just give a brief summary of that?
Sure.
And then we can move on?
We'll skip over all the details that are included in the budget and spending history spreadsheet. They're in the packet if anybody wants to review them. Anybody who decided not to come to the meeting but is watching at home, it's all available online to look at. Any questions, they can come and talk to us in the office, and we're happy to provide any information that we've got. The quick summary of the levy. In September, you approved a preliminary levy, which is the maximum amount of 3.96% increase, or $997,000. What we're currently looking at is a final draft that we'll bring back next week and ask for your approval on, is a levy of $973,177.72, which is a 1.48% increase. These are the same numbers that you looked at your last meeting.
Any questions on the proposed budget? Now is a good time to ask them. Seeing none, then we will close the levy hearing, and we will move on to the next item on the
Can
agenda.
I ask a quick question before we close it?
Yes.
Regarding our draft budget spending history?
Yes.
The only thing as I read this is we have a line item, and I get it, it's labeled YMCA. But I'm wondering, because we aren't really writing a check and contributing to the YMCA, we're contributing to a county building. Should that be changed somehow?
I believe that used to be labeled
We used to be labeled pool.
community center or pool.
We can change that to community center.
That's funny, because I feel like it once was called community center, and then we were like, well, why don't we just call that YMCA for clarity? So it's kind of funny.
And I figured that's what it was, that it's a clarity thing, because in our minds we go, oh, it's that spot. But if people look at it, they go, oh, you're contributing to the YMCA. No, we're not contributing to the YMCA, we're contributing to the county
That's right.
for the maintenance
For the
of
building.
their building,
Correct.
Yes.
which currently is leased by. So I
Yep.
just thought that maybe that might make it a little bit, I don't know, probably muddies the waters, but I think it takes that question out of there.
I have no problem with that.
We can even put YMCA in parentheses, maybe.
I just
Send
want
the
people to
Put a little
understand.
paragraph underneath it
I
that
just want
says,
people to understand
"We really
we're not
play the
writing-
county."
We're not writing a check to them, and not that even if we did, I don't have an issue so much, but I think that it
Yeah.
helps people understand.
Good?
Thanks, that's it.
No? All right. So we'll close the levy hearing and then move on to the calendar parking amendments and amendments. So, Pat, I don't know if you want to come and sit up here or if you just want to listen, but either way, your feedback is pretty important in this, I think. Yeah, take the jacket off. We got to see who you are.
It's chilly in here.
Going to the hot seat, I gotta get my jacket.
Okay.
Yeah, the draft ordinance is in the packet. It's been distributed to the sheriff, the county engineer, the county attorney. They've all looked at it, the county administrator as well. The language that's in the memo about the handicap parking spaces was provided by the county engineer as an example for you to consider as well. It's not included in the draft ordinance right now, so it's something that you can talk about if you want. What are the major changes in here? You can see that we've got the renumbering of it so that it actually it matches the same numbering we use in the rest of the ordinance, and that there's not two E's anymore. In the new F, there's language that says alternate day parking regulations do not apply to the area described in this subsection. So this is where we are just making it absolutely clear that the calendar parking alternate day is not also downtown. And then the next section G, we're saying neither the calendar parking nor the 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. Are rules that apply to Highway 61. So I think those are both things that you asked us to do, and this is the language that we came up with. And then we also made a couple of corrections for gender-neutral language in there that I'm embarrassed that I didn't catch the first time. So we've got those things for you. In the case of the handicap parking, I didn't include it in the draft, and I'm not sure we need it. If we think about particularly the way we're going to be enforcing this ordinance, the most enforcement action is going to occur because a maintenance person is going to report a vehicle that is in the way of their maintenance activities. And I mean, when we've talked about how the sheriff's office is planning on handling that, that doesn't mean there's a deputy that rolls down there and that car gets towed right away. That we still see a role for, well, non-law enforcement staff, first of all, but also deputies to try and correct the situation without having to tow anybody. So if there's a vehicle that's parked in a handicapped space, it's because they're using a local business and they're going to be there in a temporary manner. And that's something that we can work around as maintenance crews, first of all, without having to tow somebody. But it's also something that if that car was there for 3 days in that spot, we probably would want to be able to deal with it. So I think this belongs on our list of exceptions or rules about how we intend to enforce it. Things like, what are we going to do on Sunday mornings in front of churches? What are we going to do? Just whatever that list ends up being. We don't necessarily want to codify that, but we should at least tell people what our intentions are when it comes to it. I think that lives there well, but if you prefer to have it written in an ordinance, this language I think is great and works very well.
So basically, you're giving this as an example. You don't expect us to put this into the ordinance right now, understanding that there's going to be other things that we're going to have to bring in as considerations as well.
Well, the other things that, when I'm talking about a list of exceptions, I'm suggesting that what we've talked about anyway is trying to write down a policy document, not an ordinance, but a policy document that says this is how we intend to enforce this ordinance.
So you're looking
And-
at administrative kind of side or just policy that sits out there, so you or the sheriff or whoever is dealing with the issues kind of knows what kind of the rules we're playing with. I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, I've instructed my staff, kind of like the administrator says, we will wait for maintenance crews to phone in and say that there's a vehicle parked on the wrong side of the road as they're trying to plow. And what we're going to do then is, I've given them, 2 warnings, which one of them must be verbal. So you must contact the registered owner for that vehicle face-to-face, say your car is here, this is the second time, and it's kind of like the 3 strikes, if we get called again on your vehicle being here again, it will probably get towed. So, and that's what we tried to do, with the postcards on the vehicles, was an educational initiative to get people so they would start parking on the right side of the road. And I know that caused quite an uproar, which I'm not quite sure why. I mean, they're not tickets, they're not warnings, they're nothing more than, this is going into effect on this day, and this is where you must park your vehicle. And that's all it was. So talking with Mike and Kristen and my staff, we've come to this decision that, once, maybe if you can't get a hold of the registered owner, write something up and put it on their car. Twice, you need to get a hold of the registered owner no matter what. So at least they have the chance of a conversation with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third time, it's, that's the way it goes.
Is that the way that Minnesota statute 168B, is that the way that's written, or is that the way you're choosing to enforce that?
That's the way we're choosing to enforce it.
Okay, cool. Okay.
So my observation that, this last snow event, seemed like it worked fairly well. I didn't see a lot of issues, but the first day, the plow crews came through and did their general plowing, but then the second day, they came back through and tried to clean up, because they didn't get to everything the first day. And
Right.
I mean, do you see any instances where the second day becomes an issue, where people think that the streets are cleared once the plow comes through and they don't have to comply? I mean, I didn't pay as much attention that second day, but the first day seemed like it worked out.
The first day, I thought it worked out real well, and since, since we started putting the postcards on the vehicles that were parked on the wrong sides, and this ordinance went into effect, I've taken some drives just through town, and a lot of the streets now, you don't see a car parked on the street either, on either side.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think people are getting it. I don't know. I mean, I think an instance of having to go around the second day and clean things up, I think that will start, we'll see that decreasing. I think the only issues I can see that may be ongoing are, VRBOs or rental properties
Mhm.
where maybe they're not informed, or maybe they're not paying attention when they are informed that they need to park. But as far as the people who live in town, I think everybody's picking up on it, and it's just, I think it's going to work out well.
Well, I did see one spot, and I made an assumption, which is probably the wrong thing to do, but last night, driving down the hill on 4th Avenue West, there are 2 vehicles parked that are obviously plowed in. One of the vehicles on the back of it actually is spray painted junk, and I'm thinking to myself, are they hoping that we actually choose to tow these away? And then they go, I don't care if I get it back. But that remains to be seen.
Well,
So-
see, and that's the other thing I instructed my staff to do, was not, or to wait for calls for maintenance. And if we haven't had any calls for maintenance, we're not, we're not going to be actively patrolling. We can, and, if somebody, if somebody wants to place their junk or car on the side of the road and hope the city tows it, well, even in the ordinance, it says the registered owner is responsible for the tow bill, so.
Right. It's gonna go bad. So, so then, we have some amendments made here, some logistical amendments, some content amendments to reflect what the conversation we had at the previous meeting. It seems to me like we have to make a decision on the amendments that have been proposed, and also we have to figure out whether or not we want to take that handicap chunk and put that, or codify that into the ordinance itself, or if we want to wait to see how that, what other amendments there are, and do all that at once. Does that sound like a reasonable summary for expectations here?
I'm satisfied with what we have here, knowing that there are still going to be other administrative policies that might impact the enforcement side of this. So I'll make a motion that we approve ordinance 2019-03.
As amended.
Well, it is the amendment.
That is
so-
the amendment?
Yeah.
Okay, was it 2019-2?
It was,
It was, okay, gotcha.
and now this is 3.
All right.
We're quick to remember.
So there's
3 times this year.
So there's a motion, is there a second for that?
Well, I'm not opposed to it. I'm just wondering, a couple of things.
Should
Have
I
we-
second it? So
If
we
you
can
want
talk
to.
about it?
Yeah, because I got a couple things I want to talk about, so go ahead.
Okay, I'll second it,
There you go.
and then discussion. Way to go.
One, have we heard anything from the highway engineer regarding how this is working? I know she probably couldn't be here, and I don't know if either Pat or Mike have.
Well, she's
Want
been
to
in the
share?
loop on all the conversations we've had about this draft
Okay.
ordinance. She thought this was fine. She didn't offer any other things she'd want to see.
Okay,
I haven't heard any feedback about actual issues that have occurred with maintenance.
okay.
And, I mean, it hasn't been that many times
No.
that they've done it, so I'm not sure we would yet.
My other question and thought is, even though, I'm wondering if we shouldn't put the handicap piece in that, so that we don't have to come back just for that, even if it's not in 4 months, even if it's 2 years, as we're gonna keep changing through, that the piece just isn't there and included so that we make it clear right from the get-go that this is what our expectation is.
Well, and I think that there's a way we can do that. Chris, hey, Chris.
Yes.
Whoa.
Oh, that was feedback.
You must be listening to our live stream.
Ooh,
Waka, waka, waka. So the ordinance, you helped write this ordinance, and are we setting ourselves up for additional amendments and adjustments in the future if we don't include a piece of clarification there that exempts people who have a qualifying handicap sticker tab thing that on their car right now? Identification, or is that something that we don't need to include in our ordinance because it's just assumed at, on the state statute level?
You don't necessarily have to include it in your ordinance if you don't want to. I think that, the discussion about, how this is going to be enforced and, doing it as an administrative type of policy is a fine way to do it. Because I don't think that this is necessarily going to be something that comes up very often anyway. And if it did become a problem, you can always amend the ordinance. It's not hard to amend the ordinance to add that language in. But again, if you feel more comfortable having it in there, you could certainly put it in there. I looked at the language. The language seemed fine to me, so you could add it if you want. I think what you're hearing is that it's probably not necessary from an implementation standpoint, but it's ultimately whatever you're comfortable with.
And I kind of view it as almost informational. Alyssa came 2 weeks ago to talk to us about it and said, hey, what do I do with this?
Mhm.
This would tell businesses right off the bat, if somebody's going online and looking and reading, that, hey, this is okay.
That it's
I can
exempted.
still use my handicap, is my thought.
It's a reassurance of
Yeah.
that. Of
Because
that
otherwise people
statute's
aren't
there.
going to know that. They're just going to go, oh, alternate side, you can't use this. I just want to be give as much information to people kind of as we can to make it clear.
I would err on that side as well, but I know that the motion that we have on the table right now is for the approval of the statute or ordinance 2019-3. So then we can either amend the motion, or we can vote on it and see if it passes or fails, and and then have a secondary motion going on there. So I don't know, Tim, what do you think?
I don't have any objection to the language. I just think administratively it can be dealt with. But if you think that you want it in the ordinance, I don't have any objection to that either. So I would amend my motion to include the handicap language as part of the ordinance and not leave it as just an administrative policy.
Okay. Is there any further discussion then regarding that?
You're okay with that change?
I'm moving forward with the, moving forward with the motion.
I don't really have an objection to it either, because my feelings about it are, if it becomes a problem, we can always come back and change the ordinance. So my opinion is the same whether you put it in or not.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion to approve ordinance 2019-3, including the exemption for persons with physical disabilities?
You had talked about wanting to do both readings in one meeting. I don't think that's necessary because of the way that we're rolling out the enforcement of this. I think that your intentions are very clear to the people that are using this ordinance, and our ability to communicate about what the rules are clear. So I don't think there's an urgency to have to do that. Plus, you're going to come back next week to do.
Are we? We don't have a meeting scheduled for next week.
18th.
You do.
Yeah, we do.
18th.
Yeah.
Oh, we do.
We're not coming on the
Oh.
25th.
Oh,
Yeah.
actually, that's it. That's all.
It's going to be a hard.
So that's my recommendation,
Please
is
don't
just
not.
to
Yeah.
do first
Okay.
reading now and second reading next week, and we'll publish it and it'll be ready.
I would agree with that. Any further discussion on this? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. All right, so we will get that updated as far as ordinances
Thank you,
are
Pat.
concerned. Yes, thanks for coming, Pat.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Yeah, you can stick around for Tobacco 21.
If you'd like me to, I will. If
I
there's
mean,
any discussion.
It's up to you. We're basically just going to have an introductory discussion on it tonight, so we can
Okay.
expect to have a more robust conversation in the future.
Okay.
So it's up to you. We'll take you if you
He's
want.
here now.
Yeah.
Who wants to go out in the
Sounds like
cold?
somebody wants
Yeah.
to keep you here. All right, moving right along. Come on up. We're going to talk about a resolution for bond sales with Chris Mickelson from Ehlers, and take it away. Sounds like you have some reasonably good news for us.
I have some good news tonight. Yes, thank you, Mayor, Council members. Again, Chris Mickelson with Ehlers and Associates. We assisted the city with the sale of its $1,110,000 general obligation improvement refunding bonds, what are called Series 2019A. This refunding bond issue took out the 2009A bonds solely for interest cost savings. So this new structure is basically identical to the maturity structure from that 2009A issue. And so in front of you here is our sale day report. We'll open up here to the first page and just go through some of the key points here, and then happy to answer any questions that you guys may have. So as a part of this sale, we worked with Standard & Poor's to get an updated rating, and you can see there that S&P affirmed the city's existing AA rating with stable outlook. This sale, we received 5 bids this morning. The low bid came from United Bankers Bank. They're based out of Bloomington, Minnesota. You can see there their bid ultimately was a 1.70%. The high bid was a 2.17%, and that came from Northview Bank, based just out of Finlayson, actually, so nearby here. The interest difference there, just over $33,000 in total interest cost. The principal amount was reduced from what we originally had at that 1.15 million down to 1.11 million because United Bankers Bank had a little bit of a premium in it. If you remember back from a couple of years ago, the city received a premium bid on its GOCIP bonds. Basically what that means is the bidder priced the bonds above par, and they do that so that they can coupon the bonds higher than what they ultimately end yield to the investor. We'll see that kind of play out on the bid tab on the next page here. But the main point for the sake is just that because of that premium dynamic happening, is why we were able to reduce the par amount while still netting the same, total amount required to redeem the 2009A bonds. UBB just took a little bit of underwriter's discount, $4,440. That's what they pay themselves for taking part in this transaction. You can see that premium at just under $24,000. So really, that reducing by $40,000 is a combination of not only $24,000 of premium, but also the fact that we built in an extra 15 or so in underwriter's discount for UBB to compensate themselves with. And again, they took just kind of a fraction of what we had built in for potential underwriter's discount. And then cost of issuance, that's our advisory fee as well as S&P's rating fee and QTAC Rock's bond attorney fee at just over $31,000. The end yield to the investors that will be holding these bonds will range from 1.1% on the earliest maturities to 1.9% on the latest maturities. And maybe the most important number in this report is The total savings to the city by doing this refunding is $163,175. And so that was maybe about 20 or so thousand better than what we had discussed about a month ago with the pre-sale report that was in front of you. The true interest cost that we had estimated at that time was somewhere in the ballpark of a 2.08%. And again, what ended up happening was UBB, the low bidder, submitted a 1.70%. And by, achieving a 38 basis point better result, that leads to, that much more in future value savings. The present value benefit here, just under 150,000. And so the net present value benefit relative to refunded principal is 13.6%. And if you remember back to what we discussed a month ago, anything over 3% is something that we look at and we consider, we put in front of our client communities and say this is something that maybe is worth thinking about. As you get into the 5-6%, then it certainly is worth the doing. Anything over 10% is really a fantastic result. And so given that cities can't advance refund anymore, these bonds are coming callable on February 1st of 2020, then the timing of really being in the lowest interest rate environment we've ever been in means that this really worked out quite well to the city's benefit. A couple other points here on this page. These bonds will be callable. The call date will be February 1st, 2026 for the February 1st, 2027 maturities and all those thereafter. That was something that I know that that Mike and Kim felt strongly having as near of a call date as possible without seeing any sort of interest rate penalty or any sort of hit to the refunding savings. And I think it's safe to say that this is a nice aggressive call feature while obviously not impacting the savings or the interest rate on this sale. And I already touched on the reduction in size. Closing date, December 30th, that's the date that the city will receive the proceeds from this sale. And so the formal action here in front of the council would be to adopt the resolution that Justin Reppy at QTAC Rock provided Mike and Kim, and I would imagine they distributed to you guys here this evening.
Well, I emailed it around. We haven't printed it out.
Yep.
So
Sure. The next page just lists the attachments. So if you flip to the following page, the bid tabulation shows the 5 bids that were received. You can see UBB's bid there at the top, that true interest rate of 1.70%. That concept of premium that I was talking about. So if you see there, their couponing is 2% coupons across the board, but they're yielding anywhere from 1.1 to 1.9%. And so the way you yield less than what's stamped on the coupon is you have to price the bonds above 100. So not only do bonds have a coupon, they also have a price to them. And then the way you make that yield come up and down is you increase the price to bring that yield down, and you decrease the price to bring the yield up higher than what the coupon is stamped. So that, in a nutshell, is that premium phenomenon. And then you can see Baird, Northland, BNY, and Northview make up the remaining bids here. Anywhere from 1.81% on the cover bid from Baird to that 2.17% from Northview locally here. Next sheet is the final sources and uses. So this just shows the par amount at 1.11 million, the reoffering premium of 24,000. That's on the source side. UBB's discount that they took, the COI, and then the 1.95 million required to redeem the 09A bonds, plus that little bit of rounding. Again, just a function of muni bonds being sold in $5,000 blocks, gets you to the 1,133,924 amount needed, matches with the sources. Next page is the final debt service schedule. So again, the principal maturity structure here matches the 2009A structure, final maturity of 2/1/2031. Final debt service is somewhere in the ballpark of, on average, about 112,500 or so to, I guess maybe 114 is, your higher payments, 116 being the highest. On the pre-sale, I'm not remembering what we had, the estimate there, but I don't remember either. So this is about 8 or so thousand less than the pre-sale estimate for debt service annually. And then the net debt service schedule is the next page. That just shows basically the same information that the previous page shows, but it also includes that rounding amount, 3,134, to reduce that's used for debt service there in that first payment. So that reduces the net new debt service total by that $3,000 amount. And then the refunding savings analysis, so labeled debt service comparison, that shows the total savings on the far right column, what we would call the future value savings or the actual savings. That's $163,175.118 over the next 11 years in total. And that on a net present value basis, that's the smaller numbers, that kind of the middle there, 148,957. And the number that is important here of those 3 percentages, the one that's used most often, is that relative to refunded principal. And so relative to the $1,095,000 of refunded principal, this is a 13.603% savings. The last attachment here is the rating report from S&P. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, the city went through the process of updating its rating for this sale, and S&P affirmed the city's existing AA stable rating for all outstanding bonds, and then also assigned this new AA stable rating to this 2019 A issue. Those 7 bullet points reflecting the economy and then management, budgetary performance, budgetary flexibility, liquidity, debt, and institutional framework. That's the 7 main criteria that S&P is analyzing and what ultimately makes up this rating. And these points, what they really show is the city is very much in control of what it can control. Unfortunately, being a more rural economy, that's something that I work with a lot of rural counties, a lot of rural cities, and it's frustrating that S&P doesn't really have a way to look at rural economies in a way that's unique to their own situation relative to, a city like Bloomington or Eden Prairie or whatever. They're using the same market value per capita and effective buying income are their 2 primary metrics to determine their economy score. They're using those same metrics for Grand Marais as they're using for Eden Prairie. And then also, they've reduced the economy score for Grand Marais by 1 additional point because of the concentration of the tourism economy here, because that economy, that makes up something like 35% or so of the city's total economy. Then they see that concentration as what they call a weakness. And so that unfortunately brings it from what would be an adequate economy to a weak economy. But that being said, strong management, very strong budgetary performance, very strong budgetary flexibility, very strong liquidity. Again, that says that the things that you all have day in and day out control of, you're very much in control of those things.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions about the report?
Great news.
That was really good news. So if there's no additional conversation, I would entertain a motion to accept Resolution 2019-8, which is as per suggested here, to adopt these sales, or accept these sales.
2019-8.
That's the one right there, Resolution 2019-8.
Yep.
My resolution doesn't have a number.
They didn't number the form that they sent out, but I've numbered it on the agenda.
Yeah.
I see.
So moved.
Okay, so there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that. I just have one question.
Yep, go for it.
In the first paragraph of the resolution you sent out, that you, even though we're awarding the sale for $1,110,000, that says $1,150,000 down in the first paragraph. Can you change that
Where?
in the first paragraph?
I feel like I have to call my bond counsel now.
I'm sure-
Well,
I'm sure
let's
Justin
consider
discussed.
that, if it's wrong, then it's a typographical error that we'll just correct, and if it's right, we'll leave it in there, but we'll check in with our
Yeah, it
bond
states,
counsel to be
says
fair.
the city council determined to sell and issue its general obligation bonds of the city in the total aggregate principal amount of approximately
Yeah,
$1,150,000.
and if that's that's the kind of like the whereases,
Right.
then that's like a history description, and that was the action that you took. You directed us to do the sale of $1,150,000, and it wasn't until the day that the sale occurred that it changed. So like I said, we'll check in with them and just clarify which number is the right one to go in there, and if it's wrong in there, we'll call it a typographical and just fix it.
Okay. Anything else?
Pretty exciting to be able to come in that far under what your estimates were, and, good market and
Yeah, right time.
benefit to the community.
Definitely right time.
And we, this is the business park bonds, so as lot sales occur, we accumulate money in a fund, and there, in theory, not a great theory, that could accumulate enough that we pay these off early, and it's really hard to imagine doing that now with the money being so cheap, so.
Right.
This is
All
great.
Any other discussion? All in favor of resolution 2019-8?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Wonderful.
Thank you, guys. Mike and Mayor, I'll have you sign the proposal form, and then also the updated BTSC paying agent agreement. I'll get your signature quick on this, and
We can do that right now.
great.
May as well.
What do you say we go right to tobacco 21?
I was gonna say, we can talk about the climate action plan implementation stuff, but you're hanging around here, so we'll jump down to that.
Yeah, I mean, at the last meeting, I brought up the fact that the county had adopted the Tobacco 21 ordinance, and I felt that it was important for the city to also adopt Tobacco 21 ordinance to not leave kind of a loophole in the system within the city to purchase tobacco products by 18-year-olds. So personally, I think it's a good move. The county's spent a lot of time considering the implications of the adoption of this ordinance. There was unanimous approval by the county board. Comments were received from the school district, from public health, from American Lung Association, among others, that all supported and endorsed this type of action. And I think that the city needs to step up and do its part. So what I would like to do is see this referred to the city attorney for development of a draft ordinance consistent with the county's ordinance to come back before the council.
Well, I think that it makes sense for us to have this conversation at the council level. I think that if we're going to have that conversation, we should have the presentation and example ordinance information, just like the county had, so that we can have the full information and conversation. That's my take on it. And that'd be something we could do at a future meeting.
I would agree, that would be good.
So, did we want him to say anything, or is he just here to give?
And, I mean, if he's got information to share, that would be great.
Because that's kind of where we're, like, what we just proposed is gather the information, have the presentation, have all that stuff. Where are we at?
I have your slides I can put up to you.
Oh, if you have those, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I have a question. I don't know how this will all work, and I haven't seen any of the stuff at the county level, but So are we saying that within Cook County, the legal age then, basically to smoke is 21? No. Thank you, Chris.
Legal age to purchase.
Right. So if you're 20 and smoking, that's okay, you just can't buy it here.
Boy, that's an interesting caveat, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So I would just say that, along with Councilor Kennedy, I would encourage the council to look at this, because as it stands now, it's illegal to purchase tobacco products in Cook County, which consists of Tofty, Lutzen, Homeland, and up the Gunflint Trail at the resorts.
Grand Portage did not adopt this?
No. So, a lot of people don't drive to Tofty and Lutzen and up the trail to buy their tobacco products. They buy them in the city of Grand Marais. And we will still enforce it by doing compliance checks, but to really get a, get a good handle on it and get the hooks into it, I think the city needs to take a hard look at it.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've been contacted about it a number of times. And I do think that, these slides that, I don't know if I've actually seen these or not, but I think that instead of digging into it tonight, I would like the council to say, let's have this formal conversation. Let's instruct the city attorney to figure out what an ordinance on this looks like, and then we can bring all of that information to another meeting, and then we can decide as a council what the next steps are with that. So, we'd hope that you would be willing to come back and have this conversation and have all of the same input that was present at the county, so that a full consideration could be taken.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to have all the parties that, came before the county board, be able to come before the council and present their,
Right.
rationale and reasons why they think, tobacco 21 ordinance is important in Cook County. And, I think getting started is, what we need to do.
Okay.
So we'll do what you said then, and work with Chris to start drafting up what an ordinance might look like. We'll also forward these slides to the whole council so everybody gets a chance to look at that information. And
Well-
we'll talk to the folks at the county about scheduling a January meeting so that you can actually spend some time talking to each
I
other.
was gonna say, before we do an ordinance, I'd really like a full education in the presentations. I'm not willing to sign off on anything until I have a full scope of it.
Fair enough.
Well, I think that there's, the American Lung Association and others have a pretty standardized ordinance, and I think if Chris talked to, the county attorney, they can kind of have at least some preliminary conversations as to how the county ordinance came to be and what standards were used to be part of that ordinance. Because I think just talking about it in general, without having kind of any, kind of direction with how a draft might go, kind of just leaves it as a discussion and doesn't give us much focus to that. I'm not suggesting that we prepare a draft and vote to adopt that. I would like to see, the county attorney or the city attorney be involved so that we have information when we have a meeting and invite those other people to come, or anybody to come that might have an interest in this, and that we then can figure out where we want to go and what the next step is. But I mean, the county has already done this.
Yeah,
so
I'm aware of what they've done.
Yeah.
So then we can plan a presentation at a future city council meeting?
Yeah.
Maybe hold off on the ordinance, or just have some.
If it came to
Ideas?
vote in 2 weeks, or next week, I would not vote. I don't have enough information, and I have a lot of questions. So I guess I would like to see and have discussions with other groups about this. I understand, as I read that teen access and everything else, an 18-year-old that's in high school can go out and purchase things for classmates 4 years younger, but then is 19 more reasonable than a 21? Then you know, and I've had a lot of discussions with people outside and wondering why are we getting so in-depth to this. So I want to really dig into this and kind of evolve in it before I just put a yes on it for
Yeah.
myself.
There you go.
What if I offer the suggestion, we won't do any work preparing a draft ordinance for the city, but we'll just show you the county's ordinance as part of the information. I think the goal of the city and the county both adopting it, one of the goals anyway, would be that we have the same set of rules.
Mhm.
So we wouldn't draft an ordinance before you have any conversations that looks any different than what the county did anyway. So there really isn't a lot of work for us to do on that. Until you've had a chance to
So
get-
Kelly, in terms of kind of educating yourself, would it be beneficial to have, you know, representatives from the county attorney, or
Well, and there's-
what county commissioner?
There's a couple county commissioners I will actually reach out to and talk about, and I may even have a conversation on the side with Pat. I struggle with this, not for the fact, I'm not a smoker, never have been, never will be. I think I've said here before, I struggle with that we were going to move it to 21 while Minnesota's moving to legalizing marijuana. That's one of the things that I kind of scratch my head over. I get that we want to reduce teen access and kids that aren't even teen access, but by the time you're 19, you should be out of high school. So if we moved it, 19 would have been, to me, more reasonable, logical than the whole 21 thing. I struggle in being able to tell a 20-year-old adult what they can and can't do, because then I think that we need to be spending time educating. I know that it's a very big push through the healthcare industry, but we don't have a big push right now in smoking cessation programs throughout our county. We do very little with that. So I'm not saying I wouldn't vote for it, but I want to work at it. I want to be educated. I want to listen to all the information so that I can know that I'm making the right decision. And I understand it's for the good of the whole. This came up on Facebook, and there was some really good conversation there. And I stated what I struggled with, and somebody else came back and talked to me about the good of the whole and everything else, and how far government wants to reach in to tell people what they should and shouldn't do. So I want to work at this before like I said, if it came today, my thought is no, but I need to educate myself to say, what would I be really doing if I vote yes? And I know the county did it. My dad used to have a saying when I was a kid, if all your friends go jump off the brake wall, are you going to do it too? Well, my answer then was, yeah, probably, but
I love jumping up.
I don't, never have, never will. So I just,
And
I want to take a fair look
I
at
respect
it.
that, and I think that's why I want to get it
Yep.
on the agenda for discussion, so that we can move this conversation. I mean,
Absolutely.
I feel strongly about this, and I think it's a huge public health issue in the U.S., not just Cook County, and
Right.
tobacco, vaping use, it's a problem. And, you know, the little that we can do, I think we need to do.
And it'll be good for all of us to get the information, to get the presentation, to see the work that's already gone into this, and the reason why this T21 has even become a thing. So that's I think that'll be really helpful. So we'll move forward with that. And you
Yep.
got your marching orders. You know
Indeed.
what's up.
Yep.
And we'll reach out to some of these other parties to make sure we have all the appropriate information. Great. Thanks.
Thanks, Pat. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
All right, so we're not done yet. We've got to talk about this memo that came from the Public Utilities Commissioners, which is a proposal, well, it's a summary and proposal of some changes in staffing suggestions from the PUC. So in the memo, we've got a summary of what they're talking about, history of the baseline, and then the low-risk short-term additions. Unless there's something else you want to talk about, I would like to introduce those with that history.
Well, the context of this is the Utilities Commission wanting to contribute to speeding up the implementation of the Climate Action Plan. And most of the things that are in this memo that was included are things that they can just do, and the council doesn't need to weigh in on that. PUC has the authority and the ability to do some of these things. But the thing that we do need to talk about is when they're asking to potentially modify my duties, because I work for you. And although usually that sort of issue we can just manage at a staff level, when we're talking about a significant shift in resources that the Utilities Commission is willing to contribute to make this happen, it does have an effect on the amount of time I spend on things. And that's something that council needs to consider and weigh in on before we would just do it.
And that's number 2.
So we're talking about number 2, and specifically what that looks like is we would find a way to increase the contribution from the electric fund to the general fund. The most likely way we would do that is the franchise fee that we charge the electric fund right now. It's $40,000 plus 1.5%, and that's an ordinance that the city council can pass. So it's in the $60,000 range that they're paying, and if we wanted to increase that percentage, what the information we've seen from other sources is that up to 5% is still pretty normal when a rating agency is looking at how much the electric fund contributes to the general fund. Even as much as 10% happens, so it'd be pretty easy to find that ability to shift an additional $30,000 a year, and then the council would agree to use that money to purchase resources to work on planning and zoning issues rather than having staff be directly responsible for that. There's a lot of firms out there that do this for small towns right now. This is a pretty common occurrence to have a professional planning agency dealing with it, but it would change the way that the service is provided. It would mean that we would specifically spend less time in the office on a regular day-to-day basis dealing with things. There might be some calls where rather than immediately being able to dig in, it's going to have to wait a week or a couple of days while the contracted resources that we have to work on it. But the benefits of it are that you get access to a firm. It's like when we're paying Chris, we get access to Chris's entire firm and all the expertise that comes with that, and that there's a lot of really significant benefits to a model like that as well. The cost is that it's not instant. People can randomly walk in and get access to all the best information all the time.
Yeah, and just to add to that, at the utilities meeting, we talked about these 3 items, and I was the one that kind of raised the question about, well, this seems to be something that's kind of administratively outside of the purviews of the PUC to decide how that money might get spent if the electric utility did provide resources to the city general fund. I mean, we have the responsibility to decide how to spend general fund monies and how to prioritize how to spend those monies. Maybe it's to spend money to contract for planning and zoning services. Maybe it's to do something else that the city council feels is a priority. And I think that's where the issue kind of came, that we should bring this to the council to have us decide how best to, utilize those resources. I mean, I think it's a good idea, personally, but I don't know that the rest of the council is because we haven't talked about that. We talked about, kind of in a general sense, we talked about the possibility of this happening, that the electric utilities might provide some resources, but we didn't talk about how that money might be used in any kind of level of detail.
And the reason that I'm offering a suggestion of that now is in response to their question, not anything that you've talked about. So they are looking for more administrative resources that we already have to be spent on one of their priorities. And so it's a shifting of what we're doing. And they're willing to add more resources to the pool so that that can happen, potentially hold everything else harmless, but it still is something that is up to you.
Well, and it seems like it makes a lot of sense in that we've identified some of those zoning issues as priorities that we're already working on. We're investing right now money into a consultant to do work with our zoning ordinance and dealing with affordable housing issues and regulations that affect housing development in the community. So this might make complete sense, or we may decide that those resources are better spent somewhere else on some other project. So that's why it's back to the council to consider how those shift in administrative duties might be might change.
One other thing I'd offer before you dig in too much is, I've mentioned that I've already stepped up some of my duties to kind of backfill the need for management level stuff happening in the electric department, particularly with our relationship with SIMPA. That's something that is really important just to the electric department's operations in general, and that without an electric superintendent, there isn't an obvious staff person to do that, and we've had commissioners also try to build that, but it's really, I mean, you can imagine having to take a 2-day out-of-town trip every month as a volunteer or basically volunteer person, and how not realistic that is on an ongoing basis. So part of this is, it wouldn't be this full amount of time that suddenly I'm working on a climate action plan. It's really a way to continue what's already started, which is me spending more time working in the utilities departments, just on operational stuff.
Go ahead.
Two thoughts come to my mind. And I feel like a broken record. They're things that I came aboard and started talking about fairly early when I became a counselor. But when we talk about the city administrator and shift of duties, I go back to thinking, one, you haven't had your job description looked at and reevaluated. You are the only one now in all of the group that has not had that done, which I think that is something that we should consider before this happens. And I think that also then, because we have not done a performance evaluation, to actually have discussions in personnel matters about the administrative position, I think those two things should take place before we decide what else we're going to shift and do, and how we can manage that. And when we talk about the electrical department, it was back in the late 80s that they went to 3 people. It's been now for almost 2 years that they've been 2 people, with you taking more than that,
Yeah.
that you've been taking some of those duties. So as we start talking about how funds would be spent and managed, I kind of think we need to go back and dig into some of those things. I'm not saying I wouldn't be okay with this, but I think this is a really great time to go back and figure out some of that before we modify anything, and see where we're going to spend monies for personnel and how to best fit all of this for the city, especially moving forward. And I know there's only 3 of us here tonight, so we probably won't take any action, but those are really 2 things that I think would help us as a planning tool to move forward with. So, just my thought.
Well, I mean, I think you've got make a lot of good points there, Kelly. I think Mike's job has certainly over the years gotten a lot more complex and has evolved from where it was a few years ago to being much more involved with the utilities because of the lack of having a utility supervisor, and we haven't done any job descriptions or even done performance evaluation. So maybe those are the first things to put in place before we look at how this might, your responsibilities might be restructured. I mean, I think you've got a pretty good handle on how it all fits together, but if you weren't here tomorrow and somebody else was, I think we'd have a hard time,
Maybe.
piecing all of this together. And
I started day 1 too with that same situation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if Kim and I both left, you might have a hard time.
Yeah.
But if only one of us does, I think there's enough continuity.
Don't
And-
travel in the same car.
And the fact is, I mean, with all employment situations in an organization that's as small as ours, the duties end up being designed around what the people have the capability of doing as much as an interest, as much as the need. Like, all those things kind of equally play into it. And the decision to have this position take on planning and zoning occurred with a previous employee. You know, it was an organizational decision that we've carried through, but there's no magic to it, right? There's no, it's not the right or wrong thing. It's just what made sense then, and it still makes sense now, but we could do something else that makes sense. And it's the same thing with the utilities director. A lot of cities this size, the administrator is also the utilities director, and in a lot of cities this size, they do it a different way. So, I mean, there isn't a right way. It's all about what we want to do. I suspect when you look at my job description and think about if you would make any changes to it, you'll find it's probably not there where these decisions are made, because my job description says I'm responsible for all the organizational stuff.
And
And then,
others
you know,
define
what are the
necessary.
actual, but how do I spend my time is more about what feedback am I getting from you about what your priorities are, and what are the projects that we have going on, and what are the organizational issues that are important. And that might be a good thing to add to the list too, to look at the job description, to do a job performance evaluation, but also that, you know, it's a new year again, and it's time for us to sit down and talk about what your priorities are, and make sure that now that we've knocked a few things off the list or moved them down the path, that they still remain the same, and then think about, well, is this helping with that, or is it hindering it, or is there something else we need to do differently?
Well, and how are we spending our dollars to get the best bang for our buck? Is switching you, and this is just all theoretical, I'm not saying yes, no, or otherwise, but is switching you to doing this the best thing for the dollars, or could we actually hire somebody else at maybe a lesser cost, or doing some things, or more time? There's so many things that play into it, so that's
Right.
why I'd really like to examine how this all sits. And I've said before, we haven't done anything with the administrative job description or the performance evaluation. So I think that those are really good informational pieces that need to occur, especially because you've been here for how many years now?
19.
Yeah. So,
My job description's changed in those 19 years, so it's not never been touched.
Right,
It's definitely
but it's been
changed.
a long time.
And just because I don't think you're going to find any changes doesn't mean you shouldn't look at it. So I don't have any opposition to what you're saying. I think that the reason why we're talking about this to, you know, planning and
It's
zoning
for climate.
is because,
In our-
but not just for the, you know, not the original motivation of the Utilities Commission, but why planning versus something else that's on my
Right.
list. Is because I think it's feasible for us to buy that skill on the market.
Right.
Whereas it's really not feasible for us to go buy utility administrator on the market. That's one of the things that's on the list too. What if we just filled the electric superintendent position? It would cost a lot more, and you'd get some other benefits from it.
Mhm.
But but we don't even know if we could, right? Is that skill available to us at the price that we're able to pay? It might be a real challenge. So that's one of the things I'm thinking about, is searching for what's feasible too, not just
Right.
what we want.
So right now, where we're sitting, what the PUC is looking for is they're looking for the city council's perspective on number 2. I think that's pretty much it. So there's not really anything, we don't have to make any decision on this tonight. I mean, we don't have 2 members who aren't here. It seems to me like it may not be a bad idea for us to do a little bit more homework on this one, and wait for more of our council to be back, and then to actually have a more in-depth conversation on it. I hope that doesn't hurt the PUC's feelings at all, but.
Oh, I don't think it'll hurt the PUC's feelings. I mean, I think that there was there was an interest in trying to do some things to help implement the climate action plan. And the 2 items that the PUC can carry out on their own the faster implementation of the AMI metering. It's something that was going to happen, and we're just going to try to speed that process up, and so we have those meters available and can start to use those
Fair
to. And then the other item was to increase the CAP coordinator time so that we can actually start to look at trying to do some implementation through that,
Right.
through that individual or individuals that may be doing that work.
And really, all three of these things work together to create a more successful process or a more successful effort. So that, I understand the importance of number 2 in this, in this plan.
Well, Mike only has so much time, and it's the question of how do we, as the council, want to dictate to Mike where he, uses his time. And, Utilities Commission would like to see him put more time in on some of the utility issues, so.
And they're willing to put forward the funding to make that happen.
And it's not so much about me, right, as much as it is about,
Resources.
it's hard to find a replacement for existing people that are already here to come in an incremental way. Whereas it's a little easier to talk about taking somebody who's already here and shifting a little bit of their time to try and add that ability for more utilities management to occur without bringing a whole new person in is really.
Right, and in a way, we just did that with the hiring of a contractor to do the work with the zoning ordinance, so that they're taking that time that Mike would have otherwise had to commit, or somebody else would have had to commit to that, and just turn it over to somebody else to complete.
When will we hear about the grant?
By January.
By January?
The McKnight will be here on Friday, and they're doing a site visit that they do before they make a decision about the grant, so.
Okay.
There will be a number of us that will be there to meet with them about the potential impacts of this. And feeling pretty confident, but also, making sure that we need to know what we're proposing. So,
Okay.
great. Any further discussion on that? We can continue to work on this a little bit, gather more information.
Can we put a little finer point on that, just so we know what the next steps are? I think maybe you've already put some plans that the Personnel Committee might want to take up the
Yes.
2 suggestions that Kelly made.
I think that's a
So
great
that
idea.
we can put that right on their agenda, to look at my job description, to start the process of a evaluation.
I think that's a great idea. I'm in favor of that.
Okay.
And I'd prefer, of course, that everybody participates in my evaluation, but if somebody just needs to get the ball rolling, then that's the place
It's a
we'll
personnel
put it right
committee.
now, is
Yeah.
personnel
That's the first
committee.
start.
Yeah, I think that's where we can have some really good discussions about how
Okay,
we
and
see
that's you-
things with
That's us,
him.
too?
yeah.
We're personnel, yeah, but then as a whole, when we do a performance evaluation, to have
bring-
those
bring it back.
discussions with all of us together as to
Yeah.
how we want to see this
Well, that's a good starting point then.
Yep, I
occur.
agree.
All right.
Fabulous. All right, so we're going to go to council and staff reports. We don't have anything additional to add. Well, we didn't add anything additional other than T21.
That went fast.
So, efficiency. I blame Anton. So we'll go to council and staff reports. Tim?
I never have to start at the beginning.
I know, you got
It's
to, the pressure's on right now.
PUC meeting last week, we did set rates, utility rates. We set the electric rate at a 2% increase. And remind me again, Mike, because I was confused whether the sewer.
Sewer was 2%,
sewer-
water was 0.
Yes, okay. I know one was 0, one was 2, so, yeah. And all our funds are in really solid financial position, so we felt that we could offer those rates and still be in good shape.
We had talked about the water fund potentially being able to contribute additional money towards debt payment as one of the concepts in our budget conversations, and that's not something we're including in the plan anymore. But in response to more cash being laid out for Highway 61 than we had originally planned. I think it's a good idea just to let them accumulate cash back into their funds again for a couple of years, so.
Makes sense.
Anything else?
That's it.
Let's talk about the solar array.
Oh, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so there's an update. The Utilities Commission is also thinking about a significant solar installation at 200 to 400 kilowatt, which is pretty large. If you think about what's on the Public Works garage, it's 50. If you know about Arrowhead's array, if you've seen that, that's about 60. So 200 to 400 is a big one. They have a private developer who is willing to install this array and use federal tax credits and a subsidized purchase from the PUC of the power on it to fund that. That subsidy would be for a couple of 3 years and would depend on also the number of other solar installations that company does in the county. It's kind of a weird thing. Basically, the math that they've done, that means it's $30,000 to $90,000 to get a 200 to 400 kilowatt solar array installed in the community, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars of actual work. That where they're at on it is they need to sign a letter of intent with this developer in December in order to access that 30% federal tax credit. The tax credit goes down next year. That seems like a really difficult thing
It is
do.
December.
It is December. That's what we're coming
So-
off the meeting,
Wow.
wondering whether or not
Yeah.
this was really going to be a possibility. It might still be a possibility, but not at the 30% tax rate.
Well, it might still be. What the site that they had talked about was the old Tom Tabota site.
Right.
And I said, well, that's not going to happen in December because the council's never even talked about that. That's not what they have in their plans to use that site for. So let's look for other sites. And the business park, there's a lot in the business park that's right above Como's Tank Farm. There's a 3-acre lot, and so we could potentially just use an acre of it. And there'd still be a great sellable lot that has water and sewer and street access, and we'd be the neighbor to a tank farm that's probably not the best neighbor for a lot of uses, but it'd be a perfect neighbor for this use. So I went to the EDA meeting yesterday at the PUC's request, and the EDA said that they would be willing to have the PUC acquire that acre for nothing if the city council and the county board are okay with that concept. The reason why the city council and the county board need to be okay with that concept is because there's an assessment on the lot, and we'd have to decide how to deal with that, whether that would just be attached to the remainder or whether we would somehow make it go away. But also because when they sell that lot, the proceeds are used to pay back this bond that we just refunded. And if they've been selling that lots for in the 30,000, 35,000 range, and if we take a third of it, and it's a thought exercise at this point, we're taking
Right.
$10,000 worth of value, basically. Is the city willing to give up their 5, and is the county willing to give up their 5 to make this project happen? So it's not a particularly reasonable thing for me to ask you to make a decision on, but if that seems like a terrible idea, this is a good time to mention it. The best you could do is nod your heads and say, I'm interested in seeing you move forward a little bit, but what's the best the PUC can do in terms of writing a letter of intent? It's going to have a lot of contingencies attached to it. They don't own this site, and they're not going to own it in December. So they'd have to say, we're talking to the EDA about acquiring this lot. We've pitched it to the city and the county, but they haven't said whether they're okay with it yet, but our intention is to move forward, and that's a lot of buts for a developer to accept.
So because I'm not very schooled in this, what would those kilowatts power? Where would that channel in?
Adds to the grid.
Okay.
And it's, what we're legally able to even say about that is kind of confusing, because renewable energy credits and who owns them, and who, they get to be able to make claims about it. And because of our relationship with SIMPA, they have to be involved as a third party. We're only allowed to buy power from SIMPA. So they need to acquire the energy, and then we acquire it from them. This is the deal we already have with them for the solar array that's on the Public Works garage. The only difference here is there needs to be some subsidy included in to make the developer's plan feasible for them financially. We'll see where it goes. It's kind of came up really fast and it's happening really fast, but
But the EDA is open to the idea if the city and the county can would go along with this.
they are, yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's a good starting point. I mean, to me, that's a lot in the business park that very few parties, would be interested in being adjacent to the, Como Tank Farm. I think most of all the other lots up there would sell before that one would south-facing slope, relatively easy access. And one of the reasons that I even suggested at the PUC meeting that the Tom Tabota, site was a non-starter is that the value of that Tom Tabota site is significant with the highway access and sewer and water and electric service available, that the value to the city of that lot is much more than $10,000 that might be involved with this parcel in the business park.
yeah.
Yeah, that's probably not the first thing you want to drive into the city and look at,
I'm sure some people would, but I don't think it's particularly good use for that kind of highway frontage.
No.
Actually,
We don't have that much highway frontage. Yeah, so that was, I was lucky enough to be to be here when they were talking about that conversation at City Hall, and it was, this is really fast coming up, so I think that we need to, maybe slow it down and put some more thought behind it, see what we're actually talking about, and then have this be potentially a 2020 conversation.
So is there a chance that there could be a conversation with the county to see if there's any interest on their part to even, give this any kind of consideration? I mean,
Well, unfortunately, neither Anton nor Heidi were at the EDA meeting, so that kind of easy
I see.
access to the boards was
Okay.
not there, but
Okay.
our intention is to send a communication Rena's way and try to update her and get it on an agenda of some variety before the end of the year. I just doesn't seem very realistic to
Well, I mean, that's where we left.
ask that type of question with no prep at this time of year with a couple weeks to go.
Yeah.
So I think the PUC is just going to have to decide what they can say in a letter of intent based on the conversations they've had with the EDA more than anything else.
I mean, I think that's where we left the PUC meeting, is that we're really up against the timeline of the end of the year, not having a site and not looking like we would have a site to be able to send in a letter of intent on. But if we can do it with contingencies that satisfies, whoever it goes to,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not against that either, so.
So chances are we'll be scheduling another PUC meeting in December.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, let's make sure we're kept up to speed.
All right.
So do you have anything else for Tim?
Not
Kelly?
about the PUC.
Nothing?
No.
You don't have nothing?
No,
Wow, okay. I thought I.
sorry,
had a second
did you want me
here.
to think of something fast?
No, I've only got a couple of things. So, yesterday I had a meeting with some of the marketing agents in our community to talk about how we're going to go through, like is the city going to participate throughout the Highway 61 process in getting information, like the best possible accurate information to people in the community about what's going on, how things are going, all of that sort of thing. And so that was a really helpful meeting to understand the things that we already have in place, because we already do have a fair number of things in place. That we've already talked to MnDOT about a number of opportunities for people in the community to give their feedback directly to MnDOT, like here in this room, on a weekly basis during the project.
Probably more importantly, receive information from MnDOT on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
Or bring issues from MnDOT to hear about. Yeah, they're going to do that, which is terrific.
And and also how are we being the city and all these other stakeholders that their job is to get information out to people, how are we going to make sure that the message that's going out is accurate information and that it's timely information, all of those sorts of things. So this was a first meeting to just kind of discuss how that looks. And I thought there were a lot of good ideas that came from it, and a lot of misconceptions that were kind of tamped down, and some good information that went out. So I'll keep the council apprised to what happens with that as well. I don't think that there's really anything. There's not anything right now that's really too pressing on that conversation. The Creative Economy Collaborative met on the 5th, and there were two main things that they discussed. One of those is creating the process with which the artists and craftspeople and whomever are able to put in a request to get a hunk of the elm wood. Right now, the trunks of those trees are stored up at Hedstrom's and are being cared for by them to make sure that we have the ability to. Well, I mean, cared for, like,
They're letting them
They're
sit
there.
in the yard.
Kelly's out there.
They're letting
I'm out there
there.
every day talking to
seasons,
them,
right.
and they're
Making-
they're
They're making
they're
sure
sitting
that they're
on
staying
Hedstrom
there.
land. How's
They're
that?
staying there. And then-
Yeah, don't move.
Exactly. So those.
Watering it.
So they're going to put together a process, and that's basically it. Is that CEC is going to put together a process that will allow for people to put in requests to get some of this wood for projects, and they'll bring, when they get that done, they'll bring that to the council for consideration, and for us to add our 2 cents to it
There
as well.
isn't a lot of real useful wood.
Yeah.
There really isn't. I saw what came in on the truck. and-
Artists,
4 or
though,
5.
that could be,
It could be.
it could be a lot of different types of.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Howard
We'll
said it
just
was
have to
only
wait
like
and see.
4 or
Yeah.
5 cords, right?
What?
Isn't that what Howard said? Like 4 cords or something like that of useful wood?
I would be surprised.
Maybe
Wow.
way less? I don't know.
I don't think so.
No, but
I don't know. I didn't see him on the truck, so. The other thing that they
He's
discussed
retired.
was.
Who has seen it, but yeah, I don't think that's 4 chords.
Fair enough. I don't know. The other conversation they had was their guiding principles. So that was, that's the document that they're going to have that we will take a look at when they're done with it, just so that we're all, just formalizing that we're all on the same page about what the expectations are there for that relationship. And that's, I think that's a very productive thing for them to do. So we'll keep that in mind. I've also been working with the library board. The library board has a meeting next Monday on helping to gather information from the library board that will go into the hiring process for the new library director. The application period is closed, and the library board and city administration will start going through the process that they agree upon to find the right candidate out of the applicants.
Did they
So-
get several applicants?
I'd say
we have several. We're
Okay.
reviewing them right now.
Okay.
I'm pretty confident we'll have multiple interviews.
Good.
And the last thing that I have is something that it's been with me for a while, and I feel like I want to bring this up as a council update right now, with intention to implement what I'm talking about. So I've spent the last year or two very purposefully engaging with members of the Native American community up in Grand Portage, and trying to understand more about the relationship that Grand Portage and Grand Marais have. I still have a lot of learning to do, but lately I've been reading a book by a local author, and have been just shocked at the depth of this relationship that this land that we're on has to those communities, those Native communities that are here. So I am going to be exploring how I can best begin our meetings with an acknowledgement of that relationship with leaders of the Grand Portage community. I do think that that's an important thing. I'm hoping that through the conversations that I have, we can get to a point where that acknowledgement rings true, both for people who live here now and for the peoples that were here before us. So that's my intent, and I hope that we can have or that I can find the right way to present that. So that's what I have for my update. Anything else?
Great voice in that concert.
Thanks.
Here you are.
Yeah, it was a fun concert. It was really fun. All right, we are adjourned then, 7:55. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Good night, everybody.